The kingdom of Valoria stretched across the horizon like a tapestry of silver rivers, emerald forests, and stone citadels kissed by the morning mist. The scent of dew and horse leather mingled in the air as merchants filled the cobblestone streets of Eldrin, the kingdom's beating heart. Bells from the cathedral tower echoed through the dawn, calling nobles to prayer and commoners to labor. It was a realm of beauty and order, ruled by tradition as much as by its king, a land where lineage meant everything, and love was often the cost of survival. Elara of House Devoran watched the sunrise from her family's balcony, the folds of her pale gown rustling softly in the wind. She was 21, the age when women of her station were expected to kneel in the claiming, a ceremony that bound them to a chosen suitor before witnesses and nobles. To her, the tradition felt like a gilded cage. The elders called it sacred. Elara called it surrender. Her mother's voice broke the quiet. "You must not look so grave, child." "The claiming is an honor," Elara turned, offering a faint smile. "An honor to lose one's freedom." Lady Davoran sighed. "An honor to secure your family's future. We have debts, Elara. Your father's illness has left us with little choice. Lord Hadrin's offer ensures we keep our lands." "Then perhaps you should kneel for him, Mother." The words slipped out sharper than she intended. Her mother's eyes softened, filled with sadness rather than anger. "You speak as though your will alone could change this world. But Valoria was built on obedience. Defiance brings only ruin." Elara turned back to the horizon, her thoughts burning like the sunrise. "Then perhaps it's time someone dared ruin." In the valley below, the banners of House Devoran fluttered weakly in the wind, symbols of a once great family now fading into obscurity. Elara's older brother, Callan, was away serving the crown, leaving her to face the claiming alone. She imagined him writing from some distant garrison, reminding her to be strong. But strength meant little when the very law demanded submission. As she descended the marble staircase toward the great hall, the sound of preparations filled the air. Servants polishing silver, seamstresses stitching her ceremonial gown, her mother directing everything with a voice trembling under forced composure. The claiming would take place in Eldrin within a fortnight. Lords from every corner of the kingdom would attend, each hoping to secure favor, or a bride worthy of their ambition. Rumor had it, the Alpha King himself might appear, though no one knew why. Some said he sought to end the ancient rite. Others whispered he sought a woman unlike the rest, one who would challenge him. Elara dismissed such tales as idle gossip, yet something about the thought unsettled her. The king was a mystery, rarely seen without his guards or advisers, a man of both power and shadow. They said his gaze alone could silence a council hall. The sound of hooves broke her reverie. A messenger approached the gates carrying the royal crest. Her heart stuttered as the guard accepted the sealed letter and brought it inside. The parchment bore the king's insignia, a silver wolf beneath a crown. Her mother read it silently, her face paling. "What is it?" Elara asked. "The king has summoned you to Eldrin 3 days early," her mother whispered. "He has requested your presence at the royal court before the ceremony begins." Elara's pulse quickened. Requested or commanded? Lady Devoran folded the letter, her hands trembling. There is no difference when the command bears a crown. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the distant toll of the cathedral bells. The summons of a king could mean many things, honor, punishment, or something far more dangerous. As Elara stared at the crimson wax seal still warm from the courier's hand, she felt the first shiver of fate threading its way through her life. Something unseen waited in the heart of Eldrin, a secret cloaked in silk and shadow. And before she could understand it, she would kneel before a masked stranger to avoid the claiming. The roads to Eldrin shimmered beneath the late spring sun, lined with wildflowers and banners, marking the path of the noble families arriving for the claiming season. Elara's carriage rattled softly over the cobblestones, its velvet curtains drawn tight against the curious stares of townsfolk. Every turn of the wheel brought her closer to the royal court, where her fate awaited. The city smelled of blooming lilacs and heated iron, a mingling of beauty and burden that mirrored her thoughts. The royal palace loomed ahead, its towers piercing the blue sky like spears of stone. Inside those walls, generations of women had knelt and pledged their futures to men of status and power. It was not love that bound them, but law. The claiming was both ritual and spectacle, a reminder of the kingdom's hierarchy. Each noble house presented its daughters before the assembled court, where suitors, lords, heirs, and warriors made their choices. To kneel was to accept one's destiny. To refuse was to risk exile or disgrace. Elara sat across from her mother in silence. Lady Devoren's face was pale beneath her lace veil, but her eyes gleamed with forced pride. "You must hold your head high, Elara," she said softly. "Remember who you are. You carry our name." Elara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Our name means little when it's used as a dowry." Her mother hesitated. "And yet it's all we have left. The king's summons is a blessing. Perhaps he will find favor in you." "Or pity," Elara murmured. When they arrived at the palace gates, guards in black and silver greeted them with solemn bows. The sound of armor and the distant murmur of the court filled the air. Inside, the great hall was a sea of color, silk gowns, jeweled crowns, and the low hum of expectation. The marble floor gleamed under the light streaming through stained glass windows, depicting scenes of ancient queens, each kneeling before their chosen king. A herald's voice rang out. "Lady Elara of House Devoren, daughter of the late Lord Roderick." All eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of those stairs pressing against her chest like a chain. Nobles whispered behind jeweled fans, some curious, others scornful. Elara lifted her chin, reminding herself to breathe. The ceremony had not yet begun, but already she felt its grip tightening around her. At the far end of the hall stood the dais, where the king's throne gleamed in golden shadow. But the throne was empty. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Where was the Alpha King? He had not attended the claimings in years. His absence only deepened the tension. Instead, Lord Hadrin approached her, dressed in deep crimson, his smile sharp and practiced. He was nearly twice her age, known for his wealth and influence, and his cruelty. "Lady Elara," he said, bowing with mock courtesy, "it seems fate smiles upon me this season." Elara's pulse thudded in her throat. "Does fate ever give you a choice, my lord?" His smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You'll learn, my dear, that choice is a luxury reserved for kings." Her mother's hand brushed her arm, a silent plea for restraint. Elara forced a polite smile, though her stomach churned. Around her the ceremony unfolded, women stepping forward, kneeling, voices trembling as vows were spoken. Each word felt like a link in a chain she could not break. She imagined herself among them, bending the knee to a man like Hadrin, her life signed away in a breath. The thought made her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. She looked up toward the throne once more, and for a fleeting instant she thought she saw movement in the shadowed balcony above, someone watching, unseen. "Lady Elara," the herald called again, "you are next." The hall fell silent. Her mother nodded faintly, urging her forward. Elara stepped toward the dais, the weight of her gown heavy as stone. Her heart pounded like distant drums. Somewhere in that silence, she felt something shift, a current of fate curling around her. And as she crossed the final steps, unaware of the eyes following her from the shadows, she realized her claiming would not end, as the others had. The murmurs in the grand hall hushed as Elara took her place before the dais. The nobles leaned forward, their curiosity sharpened like blades. 1,000 candles flickered above, their light dancing over the marble floor as if testing her resolve. Her hands trembled slightly, though her chin remained lifted. To kneel before Lord Hadrin was to seal her fate. Yet as the herald's voice echoed through the chamber, announcing her name once more, her heart rebelled. Just as she prepared to step forward, the heavy doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. Every head turned. A man entered, cloaked in black and silver, his face hidden behind a dark mask that caught the candlelight like polished steel. He walked with quiet authority, his presence commanding without words. The guards tensed, yet no one dared move. The air itself seemed to still as he approached the center of the room. Elara's breath caught. There was something deliberate in his stride, a calm defiance that unsettled the order of the court. Lord Hadrin scowled. "Who dares interrupt a sacred ceremony?" The stranger stopped a few paces from Ilara. His voice, deep and smooth, carried across the silence. "A man who wishes to make his claim." Gasps rippled through the hall. The herald hesitated, glancing toward the empty throne as if awaiting unseen permission. Lady Devoren rose from her seat, her face drained of color. "My lord, this is highly irregular." "Tradition welcomes any man of noble blood," the stranger interrupted, his tone firm yet calm. "Does the crown now fear its own customs?" The murmurs grew louder. Ilara studied him, her pulse quickening. The mask obscured his features, revealing only a strong jaw and lips curved in something between amusement and resolve. His eyes, though shadowed, seemed to hold an intensity that pinned her where she stood. Lord Hadrin sneered. "Reveal your face, then, if you wish to take part in a king's rite." The stranger tilted his head slightly. "My face is not what matters. My word, however, does." Ilara's voice broke the tension. "Why me?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. "You do not know me." He turned his gaze to her. "Perhaps I know you better than you think." The sound of his voice sent a strange chill through her, both fear and something she couldn't name. His tone carried no arrogance, only conviction. Around them, the court whispered in disbelief, but no one intervened. "Lady Ilara," the herald stammered, "do you accept this man's claim?" Her mother's sharp whisper reached her ear. "Don't! You don't even know who he is!" Ilara's throat tightened. The hall blurred, faces merging into a sea of expectation. Lord Hadrin's glare burned into her, daring her to defy him. She thought of her father's debts, her mother's pleading eyes, the life that waited if she yielded. And yet, something in the masked man's presence felt like air after drowning. She met his gaze again. "If I kneel, what will become of me?" He stepped closer, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You will not belong to them." The word struck her like a spark to tinder. She looked around once more, at the nobles who watched her as though she were a prize to be won. For the first time, she realized that kneeling might not mean submission, it might mean escape. Slowly, she lowered herself to one knee before the masked stranger. The room erupted in disbelief, gasps and shouts echoing off stone. Lord Hadrin's outrage thundered through the hall. "This is madness!" "Guards, seize him!" The stranger moved swiftly, his cloak flaring as he drew a royal insignia from his belt, a crest none dared challenge. "Touch me, and you defy the crown itself," he declared. The guards froze. The hall fell silent once more. Ilara's heart raced. The stranger extended his hand toward her, his voice steady. "You are mine to protect now." And before anyone could speak again, the masked man turned and led her from the hall, the sound of chaos rising behind them like a storm breaking over stone. Ilara's breath came in shallow bursts as the masked stranger led her through dim corridors and down narrow stone passages beneath the palace. The echo of distant shouts chased them, but he moved with calm precision, his grip firm yet protective. The air smelled of damp earth and iron, the hidden arteries of a kingdom pulsing with secrecy. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, not from fear alone, but from the impossible realization that she had just defied the entire court. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "To safety," he replied without slowing. "That's not an answer." He turned his head slightly, his tone softening. "You'll have one soon enough." They emerged into the night air through a concealed gate at the base of the western wall. Horses waited in the shadows, their breath forming clouds in the chill. He helped her mount one before swinging onto his own. Without another word, they rode hard through the dark fields surrounding Eldrin, the city lights fading behind them. Ilara's thoughts tangled with disbelief. She had knelt before a stranger, condemned herself to exile, and yet she felt strangely free. The wind whipped her hair loose from its braid as they galloped across open meadows. Every beat of the horse's hooves sounded like a defiant heartbeat against the silence of tradition. After what felt like hours, the man slowed his pace and guided them into a forest where moonlight filtered through ancient trees. They dismounted near a stone outpost half covered in ivy. A faint glow flickered from within. Ilara hesitated at the threshold. "Oh, you knew exactly where to go," she said quietly. He removed his gloves, setting them aside. "I've known these woods longer than the men who guard them." She studied him, his measured movements, the way he carried himself, the quiet authority in every word. "Who are you, really?" she asked. He paused, then reached for the mask. "You deserve the truth," he said, his voice low. With a single motion, he lifted it away. The firelight revealed a face she recognized only from whispers and paintings in the great halls of Eldrin. Sharp features, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a faint scar tracing his jaw. Ilara's breath caught. "The Alpha King," she whispered. He inclined his head. "Alistair of Valoria, at your service." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Poyuti, you deceived the entire court, even your own council." "I've worn that mask before many times," he said, setting it on the table between them. "It lets me walk among my people as a man, not a crown. The court would never allow me to see truth otherwise." Ilara took a step back, struggling to steady her voice. "So this was all a game? You let me believe I was escaping one prison, only to fall into another." His gaze softened. "No. I offered you freedom because I saw you had none. I did not expect you to take it." She met his eyes, defiant even through her confusion. "And now what? Do you expect me to kneel again, this time for a king?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I expect nothing. You chose me even without knowing who I was. That choice was yours alone." The silence between them deepened, filled with the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of wolves. Ilara's thoughts spun wildly. The king, disguised, dangerous, and yet oddly sincere, had risked his throne to defy his own traditions. "You'll be hunted," she said finally. "The council will call this treason." "Let them," Alistair replied quietly. "A throne means nothing if it demands blind obedience. I will not have another woman's fate decided by men who've forgotten what mercy is." His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Ilara studied him in silence, torn between admiration and distrust. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she had long since lost. Still, as the firelight flickered across his face, she realized one thing with absolute certainty. Her life in Valoria would never be the same again. By dawn, the news had spread across Valoria like wildfire. Whispers filled every tavern, every corridor, every chapel pew. The Alpha King had claimed a woman in secret, without counsel, without decree. The great houses raged, their pride wounded by a single act that shattered centuries of tradition. In Eldrin, the royal council convened in panic, their voices clashing through the marble chambers as the banners of the realm fluttered above them in silent judgment. Lord Hadrian was among the loudest. His pride had been humiliated before the entire court. "He's lost his reason," he shouted to the council. "To hide his face and steal a bride like a thief in the night. How can such a man call himself king?" Chancellor Varick, older and more measured, rubbed his temples. "Careful, Hadrian. Words spoken in anger have sharp edges." "Then let them cut," Hadrian snapped. "If he continues down this path, he'll drag us all into ruin." The nobles will not obey a man who defies the very laws he swore to uphold. Outside the chamber, servants carried the rumors through the streets that the king had broken the sacred code, that the woman, unknown and unproven, had bewitched him. The people whispered her name with curiosity and fear, Ilara of House Devoren. Some pitied her, others called her reckless. But none could ignore the storm her choice had unleashed. Far from the capital, in the secluded fortress where Ilara now stayed, the air felt heavier by the hour. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching ravens circle above the pines. Each day since their flight from Eldrin, she had seen the same flicker of tension in Alistair's expression, the weight of command pressing against his calm exterior. "You knew this would happen," she said finally, breaking the silence. Alistair turned from the map laid out before him. "I knew they would question me," he admitted, "but not so quickly. The court moves faster when it smells weakness." "And do you feel weak?" she asked quietly. He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "No, but I feel watched by wolves who wear crowns." Elara crossed her arms, fighting the unease that crept through her. "They'll come for you, for us. You've given them reason enough." "I've given them truth," he countered. "They just don't know how to live with it." His words carried conviction, but she saw the fatigue beneath his resolve. He had not slept properly in days. Letters from the capital arrived at dawn and dusk, each bearing more accusations, more threats wrapped in diplomacy. One demanded he renounce the claim. Another urged him to send Elara back to her family. "What will you do?" she asked. Alistair straightened, his jaw set. "What I must, but first, you need to understand what they see when they look at you. To them you are not a woman. They see a weapon, a weakness they can use to corner me." Elara met his gaze, her pulse quickening. "Then I've cost you everything." "No," he said firmly. "You've reminded me what matters. That a crown means nothing if it demands silence from those it governs." His words stirred something deep within her, a flicker of hope tangled with fear. Yet she could not shake the thought that their choices had set something unstoppable in motion. That night, as Alistair pored over his council's letters, Elara sat by the fire, tracing the edge of her cloak with trembling fingers. The wind outside carried faint echoes of distant unrest, drums from the city walls, voices of soldiers rallying under banners. She wondered if her name was being cursed in noble halls or prayed for in humble homes, both perhaps. And though Alistair's expression remained composed, she sensed that the true battle was no longer between lords and crowns, but within him, the struggle between king and man, between duty and the dangerous spark of love that now bound their fates together. Days bled into nights within the fortress, time measured only by the shifting light that crept across the stone floors. Though Alistair assured her she was safe, Elara felt anything but free. The isolation pressed against her like a second skin. No familiar voices, no laughter from the servants' hall, no sound but the whisper of wind through narrow windows. The world she had known had vanished, replaced by walls that promised safety, yet smelled faintly of captivity. Each morning she walked the inner courtyard, her steps echoing beneath the archways. Soldiers bowed as she passed, though their eyes flickered with suspicion. To them, she was the reason their king had turned against tradition. Some whispered her name like a warning, others refused to meet her gaze at all. It was not hatred that unsettled her most, but the weight of being seen as the cause of something larger than herself. Alistair often vanished into council meetings with his captains, returning only at dusk, his face shadowed by exhaustion. When he did appear, he spoke with quiet restraint, as though afraid too much truth might break whatever fragile calm existed between them. One evening, as the fire burned low, she finally asked what had gnawed at her for days. "Why keep me here? Why not send me away if I'm the cause of all this unrest?" He looked at her, the flames reflecting in his grey eyes. "Because if you leave, they will hunt you, and if they find you, they will use you to break me." "You think me a weapon," she said bitterly. "I think you're the only person who didn't see the crown before the man," he replied, "and that terrifies them." His words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Elara turned away, swallowing the rush of emotions that rose in her chest. She wanted to believe his sincerity, but the world she'd left behind had taught her that promises from powerful men often came with hidden chains. Later, alone in her chamber, she stared out over the dark forest. The moon hung pale and distant, a silver coin lost in the clouds. Somewhere beyond those trees lay her home, her mother, perhaps already questioned by the court, perhaps branded as complicit. The thought twisted her heart. She had fled to escape one fate, yet now she was trapped in another, her freedom tethered to a man she barely knew. The next morning, she sought distraction among the fortress's lower halls. The servants avoided her at first, bowing stiffly before hurrying off. Only one, a young kitchen maid named Brina, dared to speak freely. "You shouldn't wander alone, my lady," she whispered, as they peeled vegetables by the hearth. There are those who think your presence brings bad luck. Ilara smiled faintly. I've been called worse. Brina hesitated. They say the king has changed since you came. He laughs less, eats little. The captains argue behind closed doors. Some think he's lost his will to rule. Ilara's knife stilled. And what do you think? Brina lowered her gaze. I think he's a man torn between what he was and what he wants to be. And you're part of that battle. The honesty in her words struck deep. That night, as Ilara watched the glow of torches fade along the outer wall, she realized Brina was right. Alistair was fighting wars on two fronts, against his council and against his own heart. And she, unwillingly, was caught in the middle. When he came to her later, his cloak dusted with rain, he found her standing by the window. You should rest, he said gently. I can't, she admitted. I keep wondering if I made a mistake. He stepped closer, his voice a quiet promise. You didn't. What we began in that hall cannot be undone, but it can be made right. She turned to face him, uncertainty softening into something more fragile than fear. Hope. Yet in the depths of her heart, Ilara sensed the cost of that hope was only beginning to reveal itself. The fortress, once a place of refuge, began to feel like a cage. The days stretched into weeks, each one heavier than the last. As the tension within Valoria deepened, so did the weight on Ilara's shoulders. She had been drawn into a battle she didn't understand, and every time she tried to ask Alistair for clarity, he only gave her fragments of truth. Those fragments, though, began to piece together a picture that unsettled her deeply. One evening, as the light dimmed behind the castle's thick stone walls, she found herself wandering through the hidden library beneath the keep. The room smelled of old parchment and leather, the shelves lined with books older than any of the current lords. She had wandered here before, but this time something pulled her deeper into the shadows. Alistair had left for yet another council meeting, his mood darker than usual, and Ilara, too restless to remain idle, sought the company of silence and dust. The flickering candles cast strange shadows on the walls as she ran her fingers across the spines of forgotten tomes. One of them, particularly old and worn, caught her attention. It was bound in a deep crimson leather, its title barely legible, as if it had been read 1,000 times. She pulled it from the shelf and opened the first page. The words within spoke of Valoria's past, of kings and queens, of bloodlines that ruled with an iron grip, and of an ancient pact made long before Alistair's reign. As Ilara read, the hair on the back of her neck prickled. The book spoke of a hidden order within the kingdom, one that controlled the true power behind the throne, a council of nobles who, for generations, had secretly influenced the crown's decisions. The Alpha King was not just a ruler, but a figurehead, his every move dictated by those hidden behind the scenes. The words of the book began to take shape in her mind. The council's control over the throne, the hidden alliances, and the whispers of betrayal that had tainted the royal bloodline for centuries. The Alpha King's father had been a puppet, his every decision coerced by those who would stop at nothing to maintain power. When Alistair ascended the throne, he had been determined to break free from their influence, but the book revealed that he had been fighting an unseen enemy from the start, an enemy that even now pulled the strings of his kingdom. Ilara, she snapped the book shut, startled by Alistair's voice. He had entered the library unnoticed, his expression unreadable as he approached her. She stood quickly, her pulse quickening. "What is it?" he asked, his gaze narrowing at the book in her hands. I was just reading," she stammered, trying to mask the unease that had gripped her. "Learning about the kingdom's history." Alistair's eyes darkened. "What did you find?" Ilara hesitated. "Something about a council. Something about the power behind the throne." A brief flash of something dangerous passed over his face, quickly masked by a mask of calm. "Put it down. That knowledge is not for you." She clenched her fists, her voice rising with frustration. "Why? Why are you keeping these secrets from me? You said you trusted me, but you're treating me like a pawn in a game I don't understand." His voice was low and steady, but there was an edge to it. "Because the truth is more dangerous than you think. There are things you are not ready to know, Ilara. Things that could shatter everything. Her mind raced, the pieces clicking into place. What's the real reason you've kept me here? To protect me? Or to keep me from becoming a pawn for someone else? The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Alistair stepped forward, his expression softening. It's not that simple. Then make it simple. Ilara's voice trembled with the weight of her own frustration. What's happening in this kingdom, Alistair? Why does it feel like we're standing on the edge of something we can't control? He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Because the kingdom is divided, Ilara, and if I can't break the chains that bind it, we'll all be swallowed by the darkness beneath it. The words hung in the air like a curse. Ilara stood frozen, the weight of the kingdom's secrets pressing down on her chest. She had wanted to escape the life her family had prepared for her, but now she realized that in choosing Alistair, she had stepped into a much larger conflict. A conflict that might very well destroy them both. The tension within the fortress grew with each passing day, thickening like the oppressive fog that rolled in from the mountains each evening. Valoria's heart was beating faster now, every rumble of thunder beyond the stone walls a warning of what was to come. Ilara could feel it, an unease that gnawed at the edges of her thoughts, growing louder with every glance she exchanged with Alistair. His presence was a constant, but it no longer comforted her. The weight of his secrets and the secrets of the kingdom hung between them like a wall they could no longer scale. In the days that followed the discovery of the ancient book, Ilara found herself questioning everything. What was real? What was truth? And what had Alistair been hiding from her all along? The whispers of betrayal in the halls, the hidden counsel he had refused to speak of, they swirled in her mind like a storm she could neither predict nor escape. It wasn't just the court anymore. It was the people, those who lived outside the fortress walls, in the villages and towns of Valoria. They had begun to stir, their voices rising against the king's absence from their lives. The soldiers patrolling the borders of the kingdom whispered of riots in the streets of Eldrin, of lords demanding answers. The kingdom was fracturing, and Ilara felt herself caught in the middle, torn between the man she had come to care for and the people whose lives had been shaped by his rule. One evening, as the sun set in hues of blood red and orange, Alistair stood by the large window overlooking the valley. His silhouette was tense, his back straight as though holding up the weight of the entire kingdom. He hadn't spoken much that day, and Ilara had learned not to push him. But the silence between them had grown thick, heavy with the unsaid. "I can feel it," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "The walls are closing in." Alistair's jaw clenched, but he didn't turn. "I've known it since the moment I took the throne." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Then why won't you tell me the truth? Why do you keep me in the dark about everything?" His shoulders tensed further. "Because I'm trying to protect you, Ilara. And there's nothing you can do to help me fix this." She stared at him, frustration and confusion rising in her chest. "I want to help you. I chose this life, remember?" His gaze shifted to hers for the briefest moment, a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "You chose a life beside me, not the kingdom's shadows." Ilara's heart tightened. The words stung more than she expected. "And you chose this life because of some twisted idea of duty. You can't even see that you're losing yourself in it." Alistair spun around then, his expression darkening. "You think this is easy? You think I've been sitting comfortably in this chair, playing at king while the kingdom falls apart?" "I don't think that," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I don't understand why you keep pushing everyone away. You don't have to do this alone, Alistair." He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "No one can help me. This is my fight, Ilara. My burden to bear." The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. She could see it, the walls he had built around himself, the walls that kept her out. The truth he was so desperate to protect. And for the first time, Ilara felt like she was looking at a man who was not just fighting a kingdom's secrets, but his own. "I don't want to lose you, Alistair," she whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't reply, his gaze turning toward the window again. The weight of his silence spoke louder than any words could. Ilara wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them, but she wasn't sure if he could ever let her in, not with the kingdom pressing in from every side. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. The storm that had begun in the distance now raged outside, the wind howling against the fortress walls, the rain lashing against the windows. She lay in bed, her mind racing, the weight of their conversation still heavy in her chest. Outside, the world seemed to break apart with each clap of thunder, as though the storm itself was a reflection of the chaos brewing within the kingdom. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was teetering on the edge, that something would soon tip them over, and when it did, there would be no going back. The days that followed were quieter, though no less tense. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the fortress Ilara could sense something shifting, something fragile yet undeniable between her and Alistair. The distance that had grown between them began to close, but not without struggle. They spent more time together, though the weight of their unspoken words still hung between them, pressing on the silence that fell too often. In the mornings, they would walk the fortress grounds together. Alistair would point out the strategic advantages of the high walls and hidden paths, speaking with the calm assurance of a man who had lived his life among these stones. But Ilara noticed the way his eyes lingered on the horizon, how the shadows under his eyes deepened each day. She understood. He was waiting for something, or perhaps he was preparing for it. Yet it was in the quiet moments, those fleeting seconds when the world outside seemed distant, that Ilara began to see the man beneath the crown. One evening, as they sat before the fire in the great hall, their dinner untouched, he spoke in a tone she had not heard from him before, soft, almost vulnerable. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice low. "The crown—" "It wasn't my choice." Ilara looked up, meeting his gaze. "Then why did you take it?" He looked away, his expression clouded. "Because no one else could. My father was weak. He ruled through fear, and the kingdom suffered for it. I had no choice but to step in, to stop the council from taking control of everything. But what they don't understand is that the crown is more than a symbol. It's a weight." Ilara leaned forward, her eyes softening. "And now you're carrying it alone." His silence answered for him, and for the first time, she felt a deep ache for him, a pain that mirrored the one she had felt when she had first arrived at the fortress, feeling just as alone in the world. Alistair's eyes met hers again, and there was something different in them now. Something raw, something real. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do anymore, Ilara. The kingdom is falling apart, and I'm not sure I can hold it together." Her voice was gentle, but firm. "You don't have to do this alone, Alistair. You never have to." He didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was thick with emotion. "You don't know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only see power in you. No one sees the man behind the crown." "I see you," she said softly. "Not the king. The man." A long pause stretched between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of quiet understanding, of unspoken trust. Alistair's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Ilara saw a glimmer of the man who had been hiding behind the throne. "I'm sorry," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I've pushed everyone away because I thought it would protect them, but I think I've only pushed them farther." Ilara reached out, her hand resting on his. The touch was simple, but it spoke volumes. "You don't have to push me away." Alistair looked down at her hand, his breath catching. For the first time in weeks, a small, genuine smile touched his lips, sad, yet somehow relieved. "I don't know what I would do without you, Ilara." The words struck her like a gentle breeze, unexpected but welcome. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear them. The bond between them, fragile as it was, began to solidify in that moment. They had been drawn together by fate, by the kingdom's unrest, but now it felt like they were fighting for something more, something that had nothing to do with crowns or kingdoms. As the fire crackled between them, the world outside seemed distant, as if the storm that had raged in both their lives had finally begun to calm. There was still much to face, much to fear, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Ilara believed that they might face it together. They didn't speak again that night, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was a silence born of mutual understanding, of a connection deepening in ways neither of them had anticipated. The peace that had begun to form within the walls of the fortress was fleeting. The following days were marked by a growing sense of urgency, the quiet dread of an impending storm far more dangerous than any natural one. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone, and the once still nights were now filled with the sound of footsteps echoing down the halls, footsteps that carried the weight of secrets that could shatter everything. Ilara could feel the change, the mounting pressure in the air as whispers of rebellion reached the fortress. It began with the council, their once quiet discontent now voiced in hushed tones, and soon it spread like wildfire to the common folk. The streets of Eldrin, once alive with the hum of trade and conversation, were now filled with tension as people openly defied the king's absence. Rumors swirled about Alistair's true intentions, about his choice to defy centuries of tradition for the woman he had claimed. The kingdom was beginning to fracture, its cracks widening with each passing day. In the late afternoon, when the sun had begun to sink low, casting long shadows over the castle walls, Ilara stood beside Alistair in his private chambers. He had been brooding all day, lost in the letters that came from the council, from the nobles who demanded answers, and from the commoners who demanded action. The weight of it all seemed to bear down on him, and Ilara could see it in the way he moved, slowly, as if every step required effort. "They're gathering, Alistair," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The council, the nobles. They're no longer hiding their intentions." He didn't reply immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon where dark clouds gathered, threatening rain. When he did speak, his voice was cold, calculated. "They've always wanted power. They're using this as an excuse to take it, to tear me down." "Ilara," he finally turned to face her, his expression hard. "They'll stop at nothing. They know what you mean to me, and they'll use it against both of us." The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. "They want me out of the picture." Alistair's jaw clenched. "They'll do whatever it takes to separate us. They think if they break our bond, they'll break me. And if they break me, the kingdom will fall back into their hands." Fear curled in Ilara's stomach. "And you think they can do that?" "They will try." His voice softened, but the anger simmered beneath the surface. "I'm no fool, Ilara. They've been plotting this for years. The moment I refused to bow to them, to become the puppet they wanted, they started laying the groundwork for my downfall." Her mind raced. "But you're not alone in this anymore. We have people who are loyal to you." He looked at her, his eyes flickering with something like gratitude but also guilt. "I don't want to drag you into this, Ilara. I never wanted to put you in the center of a war that was never yours to fight." Her heart clenched. "But it is my fight now, Alistair. You're my fight. I won't let them tear us apart." A knock at the door interrupted them. A soldier, his face grim, stepped inside. "My lord, there's news from the northern border. The rebellion has spread. The nobles are moving, preparing for something." Ilara's heart sank as she exchanged a glance with Alistair. He stood abruptly, his expression hardening. "Prepare the men. We need to act before they make their move." "Alistair, wait," Ilara began, her voice rising in panic. "You're not thinking clearly. You can't just go to war against your own people. We need to find another way." "I don't have another choice," he replied, his voice cold and resolute. "If I hesitate now, I lose everything. The kingdom, you, me." Ilara reached out, her hand trembling as it found his. "There has to be another way, Alistair. I believe in you. In us. We don't have to tear each other apart." For a moment his gaze softened, and she saw the man she had come to care for, the man who, despite everything, still wanted to protect what he loved. But it was only for a moment before the walls went up again, the king taking back control. "We'll do this my way," he said, his tone final. As Alistair turned and left the room, Ilara stood alone, the weight of their conflict pressing down on her chest. The storm outside had finally broken, the rain pouring in sheets against the windows. But it was nothing compared to the storm that was brewing within the kingdom. She couldn't help but wonder if, in fighting for his kingdom, Alistair was losing everything he truly cared about. The days after Alistair's decision were marked by a quiet intensity. The air around the fortress felt charged, as if the kingdom itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. Ilara knew the rebellion was spreading, and the nobles' armies were gathering. The walls of the fortress had never felt more confining, the weight of impending battle heavy on her chest. But the greatest pressure she felt came from the man she had come to care for. Alistair was determined to fight, to push forward into a war that seemed inevitable, and no matter how much she tried to offer him another way, he remained unyielding. She spent her days walking the stone corridors of the castle, trying to ignore the tension that crackled in the air. The servants, the soldiers, even the horses seemed to sense it. Everything felt like a prelude to something inevitable. In these moments, she felt torn between two lives, one that had been promised to her by family and tradition, and another that she had chosen, however unknowingly, in Alistair. The following morning, she sought him out in the war room where he sat, his face dark with the weight of 1,000 decisions. Papers, maps, and letters were scattered across the large oak table, each one a reminder of the choices he had made, and would soon have to make again. Ilara stood in the doorway, watching him for a long moment before stepping forward. The flickering candlelight illuminated the sharpness of his features, his jaw tight, as he studied the map of Valoria's borders. "You can't keep doing this, Alistair," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. He didn't look up. "I have no choice." "You always have a choice," she replied, walking toward him, her voice strong despite the anxiety twisting in her stomach. "You don't have to sacrifice yourself. You don't have to lose everything." Alistair finally looked up, his expression weary. "I've already lost everything," he said, his voice strained. "This kingdom, my father's legacy, the people who look to me. If I don't do this, Ilara, everything will fall apart." "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice low but firm. "I won't let you face it alone. We don't have to follow the same path that destroyed your father. We can find another way." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "There's no other way. I've spent my life trying to keep control of what's slipping away. If I don't act now, everything I've fought for will crumble." Ilara stepped closer, her heart aching as she saw the rawness of his pain, the weight of his fear. "You don't have to bear it all yourself. You've already done more than enough. Sometimes letting go is the only way to save what matters." Alistair's gaze softened, but he remained silent, as if the words she spoke couldn't reach him. "I'm not sure how to let go, Ilara. I've never known how." She reached out, placing a hand on his, feeling the tension in his grip. "Then we'll learn together." The quiet between them was thick with the unspoken truth. Ilara knew he was terrified, not of the rebellion, not of losing the throne, but of losing himself. She had seen it in his eyes before, that fear of becoming what his father had been, a man ruled by duty, by power, a king who had forgotten what it meant to be human. And in his attempt to save the kingdom, Alistair was on the verge of losing everything that made him who he was. "I can't promise this will be easy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'll try. I'll try to remember what matters." Ilara smiled softly. "We'll do it together, remember?" His hand tightened around hers, and for the first time in days, a flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. But it wasn't just about hope anymore. It was about trust, about the shared burden of the future they both had to face. The kingdom's fate no longer rested on Alistair alone, and that realization, however fragile, made all the difference. Later that night, as they walked beneath the pale moonlight, Ilara felt the tension between them ease. The storm outside had not yet passed, but the winds had shifted, and she knew that whatever was to come they would face it together, side by side. The path ahead was still uncertain, the shadows of war and rebellion looming in the distance. But in that moment, with the weight of their shared resolve between them, Ilara felt a sense of peace she had not known before. It was not about saving the kingdom, not about winning the war. It was about saving themselves, about finding a way to live in a world that had taught them both to sacrifice too much. Together, they could finally find a way forward. The first sound of battle was distant, a low rumble of drums and the sharpening of steel. It came with the dawn, breaking through the quiet of the fortress like an inevitable wave. Ilara stood at the high window, watching the horizon turn blood-red as the forces of rebellion moved closer. She could hear the clatter of armor from below, the hurried steps of soldiers preparing for the clash that would decide the kingdom's fate. Alistair was already in the war room, his expression steely, his brow furrowed as he studied the maps spread across the table. The weight of the decision was clear in his posture. He was no longer the man who had hoped for peace, but the king who would do whatever it took to keep his kingdom intact. His eyes flickered to her as she entered, his gaze darkened by the gravity of what was coming. "Ilara," he said, his voice a mix of resolve and something softer, something he rarely let show. "It's starting." She stepped closer, her own heart hammering in her chest. "You can still stop this, Alistair. We can still find another way." He shook his head, a faint edge of bitterness to his smile. "If I don't stop them, they'll tear this kingdom apart. You've seen the unrest. The people, the nobles, man, it's all falling apart." He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "There's no turning back now." The silence between them was thick, filled with the unsaid. Ilara knew the weight of his decision, but it didn't stop the unease that churned in her stomach. The world outside had grown violent, the streets of Eldrin filled with the smoke of fires set by rebel factions. The sound of shouting echoed faintly in the distance, a reminder of how fragile their peace had always been. Ilara moved toward him, placing a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. "Then let's make sure that we don't lose ourselves in this. It's not just the kingdom we're fighting for, it's us, and the people we've promised to protect." He didn't meet her eyes immediately, but after a long pause, he turned to face her. His voice was a low murmur. "I never wanted this for you, Ilara. I never wanted to drag you into this war." Her gaze softened, the edges of her worry giving way to determination. "But you didn't drag me, Alistair. I chose this. I chose you." Her words hung between them, heavy with the truth that had been building since they first met. His eyes softened, just for a moment, but the moment passed quickly, replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a king who knew his time was running out. He took a deep breath, the weight of his choices closing in around him. "We've lost too much already," he said, almost to himself, "but we can still win this, for Valoria, for the people." Ilara nodded, but the doubt that gnawed at her remained. Was this really the only way? Did this kingdom need to be saved by bloodshed? Or was there another way, one that didn't cost them their souls? The sound of boots echoed in the hall, and a messenger entered, breathless with urgency. "Your Majesty, the rebels are within striking distance. Our forces are prepared, but they'll be here before nightfall." Alistair's jaw tightened, but his posture remained unwavering. "Then it's time we make our stand, gather the men." The messenger left, and Ilara found herself alone with Alistair once more. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm as she tried to steady her breath. "You don't have to do this," she repeated softly. "There are always choices." Alistair looked down at her, his eyes clouded with the pressure of the moment. "You're right, Ilara. There are choices. But I've made mine. And so have you." The weight of his words hit her hard, a stark reminder that they were both caught in this fight now, for better or worse. She had chosen him, had chosen to stand by his side. But now the battle was no longer just about loyalty or love. It was about survival. And she could only hope that they hadn't already lost too much. As Alistair turned to leave, Ilara hesitated for a moment. The future was uncertain, the battle ahead only the beginning of what could become a war that tore the kingdom apart. But whatever came next, she knew they would face it together, even if it meant sacrificing everything they had fought to protect. As he disappeared into the hallway, she stood at the window once more, watching as the first battle cries reached her ears. Valoria was about to change, for better or worse, and there was no going back. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, the heat of battle still lingering on the wind. The clash of steel had begun hours ago, and the sounds of war echoed through the night. Ilara stood in the courtyard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She had witnessed the fury of the fighting from the walls, the soldiers charging forward with a determination that matched the tension in her own heart. The battle for Valyria was far from over, but something within her had shifted. She had thought she understood what this fight was for, Alistair's crown, the kingdom, the future. But now in the thick of it, she realized that the true cost was far greater. It wasn't just about the kingdom, it was about everything they had fought for, everything they had lost, and everything they stood to lose if the violence continued. She turned to find Alistair, her eyes scanning the chaos for his familiar figure. The war had taken so much from them already, and yet despite it all he remained the man she had chosen. Only now, more than ever, she saw the weight of his decisions on his shoulders. He was fighting, but the toll it was taking on him was evident in the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. When she found him, standing among the soldiers near the front lines, he was already covered in dust, sweat, and blood, his face grim, his posture resolute. The once distant king had become a man of the battlefield, and the weight of the crown was no longer something he wore with pride, but as an anchor threatening to pull him under. "Elara," he called, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the fight. He motioned for her to come closer, and she obeyed, feeling the tension in her chest increase with every step. "Alistair," she said, reaching him. Her eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of weakness, any crack in the facade. But all she saw was the same determination, the same resolve. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to fight like this." His eyes darkened, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "I have no choice. This is the only way to end it." His voice was low, edged with the quiet fury of a man who had seen too much and lost too much. "If I don't fight, if I don't take control, everything we've built will fall apart." Elara reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. "And what about us? What about you? If you fight this way, you'll lose yourself, and I won't be able to watch it happen." For a moment, Alistair's expression faltered, a flicker of something, regret, fear, crossing his face. But it was gone before she could truly grasp it. He turned away, his gaze shifting back to the battlefield. "I can't think about that now. I have to think about the kingdom." Elara's heart ached for him, but she knew he was right. There was no time for hesitation, no room for doubt. The battle raged on, and every moment they delayed meant more lives lost, more of Valyria slipping into chaos. "I understand," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But just know that when this is over, when the dust settles, we'll still have a choice. We can choose what comes next. We can choose to rebuild, to find another way to move forward." He looked at her, his gaze softening for the briefest of moments. "You've always believed that, haven't you, that there's another way?" "There is," she said firmly. "You've shown me that, Alistair. You've taught me that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to choose who we become." Alistair exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging with the weight of her words. He nodded once, the briefest gesture of understanding. For a moment, he seemed less like a king and more like a man who had been carrying the burden of the world on his shoulders for far too long. "I've chosen, Elara," he said, his voice low, full of emotion. "I've chosen to fight for this kingdom, for our future, but I'm doing it for you, too, for us." Elara smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know how the battle would end, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sounds of battle continued to rage around them, but in that moment, everything else seemed distant. There was no kingdom, no war, just the two of them, standing side by side, ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, Elara felt as though they had a chance at something more than survival. The aftermath of the battle was quieter than Elara had imagined. The smoke hung in the air thick and heavy, but the fighting had subsided. The war had not ended, far from it. But in that brief moment of stillness, after the chaos, there was an eerie sense of calm that settled over the battlefield and the shattered city. People moved in hushed groups, tending to the wounded, clearing debris, and starting the long process of rebuilding. Elara stood beside Alistair, both of them surveying the scene from the hill that overlooked the carnage. His face was streaked with dirt, and his armor, once polished and regal, now bore the marks of battle, dented, scratched, and bloodied. The regal king she had known was now just a man, weary and stained by the cost of his decisions. It wasn't the kingdom he had hoped to protect. "You did what you had to," Elara said quietly, stepping closer to him. She wanted to reach out to comfort him, but the distance between them felt immense, as if the weight of everything they had fought for was now too heavy to bear. He didn't reply immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The first light of dawn had begun to break through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the city and the fields that stretched out beyond it. The sounds of the soldiers, slowly fading into the background, seemed to grow distant, as though they too were watching this moment with bated breath. "I don't know if I can ever make this right," Alistair murmured, his voice low, barely above a whisper, his fingers clenched at his side, his knuckles white from the tension that still held him in its grasp. "I've done what I had to in order to keep Valoria from falling apart. But at what cost?" Ilara's heart ached for him. She had seen him struggle, seen the burden of his crown pull at his every movement. But now, as they stood together amidst the wreckage of their world, she understood something deeper. He was a man, just a man, caught in the aftermath of a battle he had never truly wanted. "You've fought for the kingdom, Alistair," she said softly, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about Valoria. It's about us, and the choices we make from here on out." She paused, letting her words sink in, hoping he would hear the truth in them. "We don't have to carry this alone." He turned to her then, his eyes tired, but with something else in them now, something raw. "How do we rebuild, Ilara? How do we fix what's been broken?" Ilara reached out, gently taking his hand in hers. For a moment he didn't resist. His grip was firm, but his touch was hesitant. "We start by healing the wounds that run deeper than the bloodshed," she said, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. "We begin with the people, with the ones we swore to protect. And then we rebuild Valoria, not with war, but with understanding, with compassion. The kingdom can survive if we learn to live together again." Alistair's gaze softened as he looked at her, and for the first time Ilara saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, something he had long since buried beneath the weight of his crown. The heavy burden of leadership had always been his alone to bear, but now, in this moment, it seemed less isolating. He nodded slowly, as if her words had reached something deep inside him that had been locked away for too long. "You're right," he said, his voice firmer now. "We've lost so much already. But maybe it's time to start looking for a way to rebuild, to lead differently. I don't know how yet, but I'll try, for Valoria, for us." Ilara smiled, her heart lifting at the sincerity in his voice. "We'll figure it out together. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." The wind shifted, bringing with it the first signs of spring, the promise of new beginnings, of life emerging from the ashes of destruction. The blood of the fallen still stained the earth beneath them, but the world felt different now. There was a new sense of possibility in the air, a glimmer of something better, something that could be built from the ruins. They stood there together, side by side, as the sun began to rise higher, casting its light over the land. The future of Valoria was uncertain, but in this quiet moment they shared a silent promise, one that would echo far beyond the battles fought, beyond the kingdoms lost. They would find a way forward, together. Years had passed since the battle that changed the course of Valoria's history. The kingdom had endured, though it had not come through unscathed. It was a kingdom now rebuilt, not by the force of arms, but by the steady hands of those who had chosen to rebuild it from the ground up, by those who had chosen hope over vengeance, unity over division. Eldrin, the capital, had begun to show signs of healing. Where once the streets had echoed with the sound of soldiers marching, now they were filled with the laughter of children, the chatter of merchants, and the quiet hum of people going about their lives. The scars of war still marked the land, but they were fading, replaced by the growth of new life, new beginnings. At the heart of this change was Alistair, no longer the king who had borne the weight of his crown alone, but the man who had chosen to lead with compassion, with a strength that came from understanding rather than domination. His reign had not been perfect, but it had been one of transformation, not only for the kingdom but for himself. The man who had once believed that his duty to his people was his sole purpose had now found something more, a purpose shared with those he loved. Ilara stood beside him on the balcony of their castle, looking out over the city below. The sun was setting, casting the land in golden hues. The same sun that had once risen over a kingdom in turmoil now bathed them in the light of peace, of new beginnings. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Ilara said, her voice soft but full of awe. Alistair nodded, his hand gently brushing hers as they both gazed out at the life they had fought to preserve. "It is. It's everything we hoped for." They had built something new, not just a kingdom but a life together. The rebellion had long since faded into the past, but the lessons it had taught them were woven into every decision they made. There would always be challenges ahead, but the path they walked now was one of collaboration, not conflict. Ilara looked up at him, her gaze steady. "I'm proud of you, Alistair. Proud of everything you've done, proud of who you've become." He met her eyes, a slow smile forming on his lips. "I couldn't have done it without you." She returned his smile, the warmth between them undeniable. "We did it together." There had been moments when they had both wondered if they would ever find a way to navigate the turmoil they had inherited, moments when the weight of the crown and the expectations of the kingdom had threatened to tear them apart. But in the end they had found a balance, a way to lead together side by side. As they stood there, the evening breeze brushing their faces, they knew that their journey wasn't over. Valoria would always face challenges, always need to be tended, like a garden that required constant care. But they had learned that it was in the choices they made, each one small, each one building towards something greater, that they would continue to find their way forward. And with that knowledge, they could finally look toward the future with a sense of peace, knowing that the bond they had forged in the fires of conflict would guide them through whatever lay ahead. The sun sank below the horizon, but the light it left behind lingered, casting the kingdom in a soft golden glow. And in that moment, Valoria was more than a kingdom. It was a symbol of what could be rebuilt, of what could be healed, when people chose to build their futures on the foundations of trust, love, and hope. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ilara and Alistair stood together, ready to face the future with the same strength, the same unity that had brought them this far. Together they were ready for whatever came next.